a great deal of fire for his speech at the Save America rally last Wednesday that some say incited the riots and the storming of the U.S. Capitol. Here with a closer look at the president's speech is immigration attorney and KUSI contributor Esther Valdes Clayton. Good morning.
Good morning, Paul.
Esther, you watched the speech gavel to gavel. Your take, please.
Every American should watch an hour and 10 minutes of the Trump speech in order to assess and determine what is the political motivation behind the impeachment proceedings that are about to take place in Congress. I think basically bottom line is this. It's going to be politically, that speech what is going to meet the standard in terms of incitement. Legally, not so much. There's legal precedent in the form of a case, a 1960s case called the Brandenburg case, in which a Ku Klux Klansman incendiary speech was protected by the Constitution in terms of the First Amendment. And that's going to be Trump's argument. And it was just breaking news a couple of minutes ago that President Trump took no responsibility for his words. And he said that at all times he advocated for peaceful demonstrations. Paul, basically what this is alluding to is this. The legal standard means that in order for it to be incitement, there has to be an intent for violence that is imminent, meaning that it's about to take place and you know and have intention that it happens so. The president's going to deflect and defend himself and look at the speech, and I advocate that every American watch the speech. At about an hour and 10 minutes, you will read the following. I know that everybody will be walking down the Capitol to make your voice peacefully and patriotically heard. But the basis of the impeachment articles that are presented in Congress are these statements. And I read, if you don't fight like hell, you won't have a country. In Congress, what those incitement statements are going to read are different than the legal standard. You don't have to prove intent. All you have to prove is the standard, which is high crimes and misdemeanors, which is not a criminal standard. And of course, Republicans in Congress are going to come back and say, well, what about Chuck Schumer's comments saying towards Brett Kavanaugh, saying we're going to reap the whirlwind and you won't know what hit you if you decide to overturn Roe v. Wade? Or what about Maxine Waters' speeches where she says to get in the face of Republican congressmen and representatives? Likewise, incendiary rhetoric is very commonplace with politicians. And that's going to be Trump's defense. And basically, it's going to depend on where you are in the political spectrum. If you're of a more liberal Democratic persuasion, you're going to see the speech and say, clearly this is incendiary. But you're also going to have to reflect on the fact that he was talking to over possibly 200,000 Trump supporters, 200,000 of which did not storm the Capitol. The 1,000 that did storm the Capitol should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law for the death of a law enforcement officer and for others who were trampled, beaten mercilessly, and that should be investigated.
Yeah, but the makeup of the Congress is different now. The deck is not in he can't count on the Senate to bail him out, can he?
Absolutely not. And that's why I stated that politically, this statement is going to read as incendiary and incitement for insurrection politically. But legally, will the prosecution hold? Will there be a conviction on this? His main defense is the First Amendment, as stated under the Brandenburg case, stating that that kind of incendiary speech is protected by the Constitution, lacking a conviction. And the larger issue was also, can you impeach a president that's no longer a sitting president? Recall that his term's up in about 10 days. So that's also a constitutional issue as well. Basically, the Democrats are going to argue that this man needs to be held accountable. The Republicans are going to say, hey, wait a minute, it doesn't even meet the legal standard for incitement for insurrection. So they're going to be at odds. But politically, this is a threat on the Trump administration to say we still are able to wield the threat of impeachment on a second time and a second turnaround, not just you, but also impeach that kind of thought throughout the American populace to be able to stem any type of conversation that may or may not be interpreted as incendiary or an incitement for an insurrection.
Esther, because it's your business, I can't let this conversation end without you addressing the president's at the Alamo today in front of the wall celebrating what he considers one of his crowning achievements, getting a big chunk of the wall built. Your take on that, please?
I think it's largely symbolic in order to deflect what's going on in Washington, D.C., and to be able to go out strong and give that projection of strength in terms of one of his largest accomplishments, to which he left a lasting impression on the immigration laws and policies as they have long been deemed and regarded throughout the world, and especially in terms of asylum. The 400 miles that were built are one of the Trump administration's enduring accomplishments. But of course, within the first 100 days, the incoming president, Joe Biden, stated that he is going to largely overturn through executive action and overturn as swiftly as possible any kind of immigration policies and laws that were enacted. And possibly even there's been talk of criminally prosecuting some of the immigration officials in Department of Homeland Security for implementing and enacting and enforcing some of the Trump policies. So it's one of the highlights of his presidency, but it's coming in with a new Biden presidency. It will be one of the lowlights and one of the first forms of attack. And I think it's wise for Biden to also focus on policy and not the impeachment at this moment. If he indeed wants to unify this country, he needs to do so in a manner that also hears the 75 million people who did vote for Trump that did not incite any kind of violence and do not condone any kind of violence in any way, shape, or form.
Esther Valdes Clayton, thank you very much for making time for us. Hey, quickly, is that wall going to still be standing 3 years from now?
I think so, especially if the pandemic carries on in terms of health and sanitation, and also because of the instability growing caused by the economic closures throughout Latin America.
All right. We will talk again, Esther Valdes Clayton. Thank you very much for your time, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Paul.
Helping out